often we hold on to these feelings and emotions about something someone else has done. And, I speak to a lot of people about this. They're like holding on to this grudge, this anger, this frustration that someone else shouldn't have done that. And that can be years, months, years, days, decades, right? And we hold on to it almost as if us holding on to that is going to do something to that other person. But as you said, they got no fucking idea. They don't know. They don't care. They've moved on with their life. And actually holding on to that anger, that frustration, that resentment, that eats away at us. That hurts us, and even down to the medical level, right? They started to be able to link emotions that were repressed and unexpressed, right, over years and decades of people's lives to serious conditions, cancer, heart disease, and so forth. So in fact, by holding on to these emotions, this anger, this frustration you hold towards other people, other groups of people, it's not that you're letting them win by accepting, right? Because I think that's something we often hear from people like, oh, but if I accept it, I'm letting them win, as if it's a competition. But actually, we're saving ourselves from literal death and sickness and illness.
Yeah. And I think if I excel at anything in my life, it's understanding how to lead yourself, becoming someone who embodies self-leadership. Now, what does that mean? That means that my evidence is this. I grew up in poverty and violence, and I would have, understandably, every conceivable excuse to have been a real bad person and a real negative person and a really toxic and destructive person. But I'm not that person at all. As I said to you earlier, I live in a really beautiful part of the country, away from the cities, because that's how I realized I prefer to live. I've got a wonderful wife, 2 amazing sons, 2 smelly dogs, and a really nice big house, nice car, all of those different trappings and things like that. I live a really great life. So how the heck did I do that? How did I go from poverty, violence, and, well, part of it was facing that situation with my father. For a very long time, I allowed my father's version of the way life was to dictate my path forward. And there was something really freeing about looking, and also not being angry at him, not blaming him, I think real freedom when it comes to these situations is for it to not be about them at all anymore. That's real freedom. It's not going, oh, it's their fault, and yeah, they should do this and they should do that, but they probably won't, and getting all up in the anger of it. It's about just going, do you know what? I had this moment, right, where, and it was probably the most helpful thing that ever happened to me and I remember when my sons were really young, and my wife said to me, I want to have a conversation with you. And I was like, oh, this is going to be tricky. Whatever it is, it's going to be tricky. And she says, I know that this is going to be difficult, but I think it might be a good idea to have a photograph with your father and our boys. And she goes, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I'm just going to leave the idea with you, which just speaks to how lovely she is, right? Mm-hmm. So I sit with this idea. And at first I'm like, what? Is she crazy? Rare, all of these different things. And then after a little while, the emotions dropped away and I was like, maybe. And then I started thinking, well, actually, this could be an opportunity to talk to him. I'm an adult now. I don't need to be scared anymore. Maybe I can have a conversation with him. Maybe we can build a relationship. Maybe he'll just tell me that he's sorry and that everything, he was going through a hard time, and he'll say something that's going to make me, because I want to forgive him. I want him to be in my life. I want that badly. So he was already winning. Anything he said, I'd have bought it left, right and center. But we get there, we go in there. It's all a little bit awkward. I haven't seen him in a really long time. And we get the photograph with the kids, and I looked at my wife, who's like, this is a terrible plan, Johnny. And I'm like, it's all good, man. I got it. And she's like, So she goes and gets in the car with the kids. And, all of a sudden I turn into the little kid I was again, and I start stuttering, and I'm sweating, and I feel uncomfortable, and I can't get my words out, and everything's really difficult. And I kind of tell him the impact of what he has done. And, I stand there, and it goes on for I don't know how long. And he just looks at me and he says, you sound like your mum. You're always causing trouble. And then he just goes on about something else. And in that moment, something happened. All of a sudden, everything just fell away. And I looked at him for what he really was. And I just thought, you're a joke, man. Why am I doing all this for what? Why? What's, and I just realized, and all of a sudden I had this like, this pity for him, this sympathy, this empathy, this almost compassion of like, man, you look at your life, look at you, you're on your own. You're like, wow. And it hit me like really, really, really hard. And I just thought, okay. And then this was the gift it gave me. I realized that there was a problem between my dad and I, but it wasn't my problem. It was his. And I kind of just gave it back to him and sort of thought, good luck with that. And I said to him, the last thing I think I ever said to him was, if you ever want to have a conversation with me about any of the things I've mentioned, you know where I am. I haven't heard from him. So there will come a time when he passes away and I will be able to, because a lot of grief is about regret. And I will be able to look back and say to myself in that very difficult moment, Johnny, you did everything you could have done. You knew what the problem was. You were aware of the problem. You took accountability for the hard stuff that you needed to take accountability for. You accepted what you couldn't influence anymore, which was him. And the action was to walk away and protect yourself from this toxic human. And that's what I did, you know? So it is complicated, understanding that other people influence you. But here's the hard bit. And I want people to know that hear this, that I do understand how this hits. But at some point, I hope for you that you will hear this in a way in which it's intended. People will do horrible things to you, say horrible things to you. And in many cases, you let them. And that's what's difficult. And I'm not talking about like serious assaults or anything like that. I understand the difference between that. But what I'm saying is these people that keep showing up in your life, regardless of their role in your life, you're letting them. You're taking ownership of that situation. You get these dudes, right? These people in life, and they walk around with these emotional bags. And if you stop for long enough, they'll tell you all their problems, right?
Yep.
And
Amen.
what they do is they got these emotional bags and they put them down and they look at you awkwardly until you go, oh, guess I'll just pick these bags up then and wander off with them. And then about 2 hours later, you're wondering why you feel so stressed. And it's because someone's just dumped all their problems on you and walked away. And you picked up the bags and you skipped off like, hey, I've just helped somebody, people pleasing, yay. And it's like, nope, you've just stitched yourself up for the day or whatever. So I say all this and I make humor out of it a little bit. I don't mean that in a disrespectful tone. I'm just saying that that's life, right? Life is crazy, man. It's a wild experience. But when we navigate things, we got to understand the difference between our emotions and somebody else's.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a powerful story there, really powerful in so many ways. And it's like often in that moment with your father, what I'm really hearing is you were almost calling him forward into a version of the man that you needed him to be for the two of you to have a relationship. And in that moment, in his response, he's still stuck as the man he has always been, right? And he was taught to be, you know, it would have been in his upbringing to how he should be as a man. And he's so stuck in that, he doesn't see any accountability for himself, because also taking accountability, I imagine, would be incredibly painful for him to take on, because he'd have to see the things and feel the things he's done to other people in his life. And he doesn't really have the capacity, whether that's mentally or emotionally, to have that level of kind of empathy and accountability and see himself, because it would be incredibly painful for him to hold that. And it's so true of so many people that we meet in life, whether that's romantic relationships or family, is we want them to be someone almost beyond the level of their programming, right? I speak from personal experience of my own father, wanting a dad who really shows up and is really curious and interested in me and all these sorts of things. And he just doesn't have the capacity to be that human being, because I really have an understanding of his upbringing, and I'd be like, oh man. And in those moments when you are with someone like that, I think sometimes we can kind of go one of a few ways, but anger is one of the ones that can come up. Like, what is wrong with you? Why can't you do this? Why won't you take accountability? Which I think a lot of people do. But also the direction that you went is that kind of almost feeling sorry for them, because you're like, oh, wow, this is who you are. And I feel incredibly sad for you, because this is actually who you are. And you can't be anybody else right now in this moment, or maybe ever, because you just don't have the tools, or you haven't taken on the tools to be like a more expanded human being who can take accountability and have the emotional range to feel the impact of your actions. And I say why that's really important, because you being angry at him about that moment and beyond there doesn't impact him at all, as we've talked about, but it would sit on you and fester in you, and you would be seething at time to time. But in like having empathy, you kind of release yourself from it, the hook. It's like, actually, I see, there's nothing here for me. As you've said, this is about your capacity and who you are. And, you know, I'll be here when you want to have a conversation about these things. And, you know, you just never know if or when that will be.